So myself, Carl, and Robert chose to research and present the paper When and Why Incentives Don't Work to Modify Behavior. The paper was done by Uranese, Stephen Meyer, and Pedro Ray Bell. So in general, economists have assumed that higher incentives will result in more effort and higher performance. This is the basic law of behavior. Yet more recent findings tell a different story. As economists, optimization in any scenario is desired. Focusing on incentives, though, the end result is to optimize behavior. The paper we researched focuses on education, lifestyle habits, and pro-social behavior. The goal is to strengthen the predictive and analytical power of incentives, which can become specifically handy when structuring policy. Looking at it from a normative perspective, the analysis raises questions such as, to achieve higher performance, what should be the efficient level in incentives? Should the structure and level of incentives be the same across the board, across all aspects in terms of education, pro-social behavior, and lifestyle? And what should the structure of the incentives be? Should it be monetary, non-monetary?
Okay, so when, after reading When and Why Incentives Work to Modify Behavior, we narrowed our results down to 3 different topics: education, pro-social behavior, and lifestyle habits. From these 3 topics, we considered the 3 questions. When there are incentives, how will they affect the enrollment and academic achievement? As well as, with the use of incentives, how do they affect short-term and long-term objectives? And lastly, with the use of incentives, how do they affect the work ethic of voluntary workers and the overall contributions that they give? Also, after researching, there were 3 different studies. Basically, these studies concluded with the fact that there were, with incentives, there were entry at earlier ages, less repeated grades, grade progression, lower dropout rates, and higher school reentry among dropouts. But on the other hand, as the research stated, they essentially didn't do work outside of class. So all the work was pretty much done in school, and pretty much gave them less, motivation to do work outside of that. But as that is stated as well, graduation rates rose as well. As we moved to pro-social and how incentives affected those, through voluntary contribution to public goods, like donating blood or any sort of voluntary work, incentives lowered the overall effort for those workers. They thought originally that it would increase them, but came to find out that less people wanted to do any work, or less work, and provide less effort, essentially. And then lastly, for the lifestyle habits, the extrinsic incentives change the habitual behavior in the short run, but not necessarily the long run. There were only short-term changes, and they didn't seem to last that long after maybe a year or 2. As we look at economic analysis and we look at education, there were a couple studies that we found in the readings. One was done in Mexico. It was a year-long progression, and it was called Progressa. Basically what it did was it provided $55 a month to families with children in school. And it gave it to their parents or whoever was old enough or in charge of those children to essentially motivate their kids to do better in school. So not only being pushed at school to do your best, but also at home as well was the goal. The goal itself, though, was to increase enrollment and provide better overall grades. Over the year span, they found results such as entry levels at earlier ages started to increase, grade progression, so better grades, lower dropout rates, and just overall graduation rates increased. Also, there was another study by Boettner in 2010. It was done in Coxton, Ohio, and there was a foundation that sponsored students. And basically what it did was it selected random students in the school, and it pretty much followed their grade progression through years worth of school. There was rewards up to $100 in exchange for better grades. And what they found was that there were increased math scores, but when it came to classes such as reading or social sciences, there wasn't any sort of effect. There wasn't an increase or decrease in grades, progression, anything like that. So basically, the external incentives are more effective in certain subjects. And as it pertains to like conceptual subjects, they didn't really see any sort of change. Mostly the changes in the progression, if you will, all occurred with more concrete subjects such as, math and stuff like that.
So after looking at the economic analysis that looked at education, I'm going to be covering the pro-social behavior as well as wellness and health. So initially, what the paper looked at was how is this framed from a pro-social behavior standpoint. So Heyman and Ariely, they looked at social framing versus monetary framing. In one particular example, they were looking at helping a friend move. So what they did was they did a little study about, they asked certain people, if your friend was moving and they offered to pay you, would you help them? Or would you rather help them just out of courtesy of being a friend? And so what they found was that most respondents were more likely to help their friend move if there was no incentive and they were just doing it for the social aspect. So the incentives were found to diminish the interaction between the friends, for example. It kind of cheapened the act in a way. And so to continue on that, another example that shows this is through blood drives. So behavior, as I said before, is always influenced by the social perception of the activity. So there's kind of a crowding out effect when you're through pro-social behavior if money is involved. That's because you don't want to look greedy, for example. And so they looked at blood donations in particular. So for example, say you go up to donate blood and they have a giant sign outside saying $20 for donating blood. Well, you might not want to do that if you're around all your friends because it might just make you look like you're cheap and you just want to donate blood for money rather than for a good cause. So they also found that when the money was replaced with a non-cash equivalent, such as like a free t-shirt, something that you find like a free UMD basketball game, for example, that this often had a positive effect on, this incentive actually had a positive effect on going to contribute to the pro-social behavior, such as donating to a charity, donating blood, or anything like that. And so another component of the pro-social behavior is trust as well. So when it comes to incentives, they seem to create a distrust between the person who's offering the incentive and the person receiving it. And this is sometimes called the bad news signal. So that means that the person who is receiving the incentive is kind of suspicious or wary that there's a reason they're getting paid rather than just volunteering. So I might feel suspicious that someone's paying me $50 just to walk to the corner or something like that. It signals bad news. And so they had Fair and List did this experiment called a trust game where it was an endowment was given to player one, and then player one had to choose how much to give to player two. They could choose any amount they wanted. And then player two had to choose after the money was multiplied after player one decided how much to give to player two. And then player two, they chose how much to give back to player one. However, in their experiment, player one could impose a fine on player two if they didn't give them enough money back. So the contributions to the endowment were kind of crowded out as there was distrust between both of them. And it was seen as, well, I don't think the other person's going to give me any money, so why should I give them anything either? So it resulted in usually one player is keeping most of the endowment to themselves. Okay, and so now I'm going to move on to the well-being aspect of our paper. This is one of the 3 topics that was covered. So in general, habits are usually formed in the long run, and habits start in the short run and they continue over the long run. And so the paper looked at smoking and fitness. So in terms of smoking, about 70% of people want to quit smoking, but only 3% are successful. So economists want to figure out, why is this? Like, why do people struggle to quit smoking? And so even with incentives, there was this issue as well. So what they looked at was an experiment, and they gave some people money for going to a particular class to quit smoking. And if they continued as long as they didn't smoke after the class for, I believe, 6 months, then they were also given another reward. So in the short run, those who were given the reward, they didn't smoke. As compared to a control group, they had a lot more success, but this was only in the short run. In the long run, the amount who actually quit smoking for 6 months between the 2 groups with the classes was almost negligible. 6% of those who did go to classes and were given the incentive quit, compared to 5 who did not receive the incentives. And another thing they looked at was a commitment device. And so they offered to put money in a bank account for as long as smokers didn't smoke for like a certain period of time. And if they quit for a long duration of time, they were given that money back. And if they failed, then the money went to charity. This was actually successful, but the issue was that many people were reluctant to start the commitment device, and they didn't really want to do it. They didn't want to forfeit any money. And so the adoption rate was very low. So in terms of fitness, what they looked at was Charnay and Nisi. They looked at an experiment involving payment for gym attendance. So what they did was there was 2 groups, control group and experimental group. The experimental group received about $20 for every time they went to the gym, and an additional $100 later on. And they looked to see if a habit would form or if it would be more like just short run, long run. So in the short run, those who were offered the incentive did go to the gym. They kept going along with the control group. But however, those with the incentive, it actually helped them start to form a nice habit. And after the study, they continued going in the long run. And another component of this is introduced by Babcock and Hartman, where they looked at the social aspect of going to the gym. Those with friends who were also incentivized, they continue to go more often, as the social component is actually very strong and helping these people keep their good habits. And so now we're going to be moving on to the conclusion.
So in conclusion, one of the many takeaways from this paper is that it's not just as simple as that higher incentives equal higher performance. Structure matters, specifically with contributions to public goods, which can build a distrust between principals and agents. With lifestyle habits, although cost effective, this might not be the best way to produce the desired result. Education is extremely important not only in the US, but worldwide. And the results show that an understanding of a well-targeted and well-specified incentives program can work in the short run. This can be extremely useful in designing policies centered in education, which can have a domino effect on our society as a whole. Although this paper gives us a better idea of how incentives affect behavior, there is still plenty of work to be done on this topic. Thanks.